Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
Today, we have a very, very important topic that we
Yeah.
decided we needed to bring up because it is spring
Mhm.
going into summer, which means people are going to be much, much more active in the cemeteries. And
Yeah, exactly.
not just people like Diane, who works in the cemetery, or volunteers like me who like to volunteer in the cemetery, but also people who just want to get out and enjoy nature, take a walk in the cemetery, whatever it might be.
Visit
Um,
more often because the weather is nice. So yeah.
right. And we totally get it. Neither of us are opposed to people going for a walk in
No.
the cemetery, enjoying the cemetery, especially if you live, in a more urban area. And it's great to get to a nice green space where there's usually a lot of trees and
No.
other vegetation, and it makes it much more enjoyable to take a walk or enjoy nature. But people seem to forget the rules when
Yeah. Yeah. So we decided we want to talk about cemetery etiquette, especially as Jenny's saying, going into spring, people are coming out of their winter hibernation and they want to start doing some decorating or planting and just getting out. And one of the things for us anyway has been, and I think most cemeteries have this rule, is about, and I'm going to cover myself up, my little black background here, and it doesn't quite fit, but it's people bringing their dogs to the cemetery.
and for our listeners who are just listening and not watching, so there's an image behind Diane that she recently had to post about Evergreen Cemetery because this happened at Evergreen. But it says, "Be respectful, no poop and pee," and it's got a dog, with the red cross over it saying, "Don't let your animals do this on our lawns." Um,
And I get the fact that if you're coming out to visit a loved one and you bring your fur friend with you, and that's
or
even though
maybe
it's
it was
against
there
the
for a
rules.
friend.
Right, exactly. And it does, have on many cemeteries they don't allow pets, but it's okay to have the little guy, I think, have the little guy right there with you, visiting your loved one. And if he decides he needs to, clean up after him. But there are many people who just take full liberty of that they are at a dog park to let their dogs just walk everywhere and
Yeah.
anywhere. A lot of times people just let their dogs, they just turn them off the leash and just let them run.
And that, yeah, I was going to say that is one thing. Most cemeteries, the ones that do allow dogs,
Mhm.
have leash rules. Like, do not let your dog off the leash while you're there. They need to be, I don't care how good your dog is at recall,
Right.
they should not be off the leash in a cemetery ever. Part of that is for the dog's safety,
Right.
but it's also
Exactly.
for the safety of any other visitors or employees that are walking through the cemetery or working in the cemetery.
Well, yeah, and
So,
you just never know. Just like you said, you could have the best dog ever, but you just don't know what may set that dog off. And just the wildlife that's out there. Because
oh
this
yeah.
summer I was out there and I heard coyotes. There was a pair of
Mm-hmm.
coyotes who decided to make the cemetery home, and they were very, very, very close. And this gentleman was out there, and he was walking his little marshmallow, who must have been no bigger than this.
I like how you
And
refer to it
and he
as a
was like,
marshmallow.
yeah, he was walking his marshmallow. And I said, did you hear the coyotes? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't be having walking my little dog out because he's gonna be like he's like a flipping appetizer. But
That is coyote bait for sure.
yeah, he just ignored me and kept walking his dog. So
Yeah. And so definitely make sure before you take your pet to a cemetery
yeah,
to check the cemetery's rules to see if they're even allowed. Because again, there's a lot of cemeteries that don't allow any dogs or pets aside from, an
service
actual
pets. Yeah, service
assisting
animal.
a
Yeah,
service animal. Thank you. My brain is totally fried today.
that's okay.
From an actual service animal, that's different. But if you're just taking your dog that's your family pet to the cemetery, make sure it's okay with the cemetery for one thing. And
Mhm.
also check some of the bigger cemeteries, especially ones that have, um, a little bit more of a friendly visitor policy, they will
Right.
actually have particular areas for your pets to do their business in so that it's not hurting the stones or the grass that's on the graves themselves. So just
Mhm.
pay attention to that. Be very
Yeah.
respectful of that.
And
Um,
watch your dog. I
and
mean,
definitely,
yeah,
yeah.
watch your dog.
Well, and again, like I said before, it's not just for the safety of the people in the cemetery, but for your dogs. I mean, so many of the cemeteries have old headstones
Yeah.
or other monuments that are not always safe. And we know this. We see it all the time. They're leaning or whatever. And if your dog ran right up to one or leaned on it just right or whatever, there's a chance the stone could fall and definitely injure your animal or worse. So just
Yeah, sadly.
don't. So the very first etiquette rule that we want to say, besides that, is always just follow the rules of the cemetery.
Hmm.
Almost every one of them has them posted right at the entrances.
Right. It's familiar yourself. Definitely familiarize yourself with them. There we go. It's been a day.
Yes.
So,
And another big one is then moving on from that, it is following the rules, but is obeying the hours of the cemetery.
mhm.
Um, Most cemeteries, and some are a little different, but I think at least in the US, I don't know what it's like maybe in some of the other countries where I know we have listeners, but here in the US, most of our cemeteries have a dusk till dawn rule or dawn till dusk. Sorry, I said that
Yeah.
backwards. Dawn till dusk rule. But some of them actually have close a little earlier than that. There are some, especially some that have a bigger tourist population that comes
Right.
in to visit, they will actually close earlier for the safety of the cemetery and also to give their staff time to actually do some work for the upkeep of the cemetery itself.
Mhm.
So you definitely want to check the hours and make sure that you're not there when you shouldn't be. And I guarantee you, if you're in a bigger, busier cemetery, a lot of them actually do have security guards that will
Right.
patrol.
Exactly.
And if they catch you, you're in trouble. But it's also for, again, for safety after, especially after dark. Cemeteries, for anybody who's spent any number of time in it, will know that the ground is uneven.
Mhm.
So if you're walking through, and again, older cemeteries, you've got stones that have sunk, you've got stones that have fallen. And if you're walking out there in the dark, even with a flashlight, I mean, we know this from our own personal experience from
Right.
doing Beyond the Grave every year. And we're there after dark. You just got to watch where you're stepping. Things get a little treacherous in the dark.
And sometimes at night, unfortunately, cemeteries do attract nefarious people because cemeteries often are in isolated locations.
True.
So it's just a safety factor. And we've seen so many videos on YouTube, which people are out there after hours doing ghosty hunts. And they're like, we're not being disrespectful, but they are there after hours and it's against the rules.
Yeah. So if you are a paranormal investigator and you want to investigate a cemetery after hours, please clear it with the cemetery
Exactly.
before you do that. Find out who's in charge of the cemetery. If there's, a lot of them will have an office or something, or even somebody through the city or somebody. There's somebody designated in charge of a lot of the cemeteries. Just clear it with somebody. They may say no because they don't want people traipsing
Right.
around the cemetery after dark. For a lot of cemeteries, it becomes a liability issue. If somebody gets injured because they're there after hours and they
Mhm.
fall over and hurt themselves or fall into a pit or the ground
Or
is
a
soft and
ditch.
sinks, I mean, I could think of all kinds of things. And
Yeah.
there's also the safety of the cemetery itself. I mean,
Mhm.
again, in the dark, you might walk into a stone and knock it over. I always think of the movie Now and Then. I don't know if you ever saw that one. It's one of my favorite movies from my generation that I actually have watched many times, but it has a young Christina Ricci and Thora Birch, and I'm trying to think who the other actors are. Anyway, they have a seance in the cemetery and they accidentally knock over a stone, and it becomes this whole part of their story. And I think about that a lot because, they're in this cemetery after dark, they're breaking the
Mhm.
modern rules. Now the story itself takes place, I think, in 1970 or 69 or something. So maybe they aren't breaking the rules then, but it would
But
definitely
I bet
be,
they were. Yeah.
yeah. And, at one point, the cemetery caretaker's there and he yells at them. He's like, this is no place for kids to be playing after dark and all of that. But again, it's for not just people's safety, but for the safety of the cemetery itself and those headstones, especially our old cemeteries where things are precarious. sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's
And
a
I
reason
know,
for rules.
I was going to say, and I know the oldest parts of the cemetery are sometimes our favorite parts to hang out in because it's old, but also it's the more dangerous part. There's tree roots, there's weak stones, there's all kinds of stuff going on
Right,
there.
exactly. Weak walls. The
Mm-hmm.
walls are those can
Retaining
be
walls and stuff.
really
Yeah.
dangerous. Yeah.
Um, and speaking of that, then when you talk about those weak walls, the other thing is don't lean and sit on the
Right.
monument unless it's a bench that's meant to be sat upon.
Right, exactly. It has, yeah. Or even when you're at a service and you have little children, and we understand kids get squirmy, they get they can't run around.
Right.
There's all this spent pent up energy. Is don't allow the kids to sit on or crawl on neighboring headstones because it's the reversed. It's like, well, how would you feel if that was your mom or your dad or your grandparent that somebody's letting their kid crawl all over it? So it's just being mindful of your surroundings and sort of paying attention and thinking how it would be if it was your family member.
Yeah. And again, for everybody's safety, you don't, if a stone is loose and there's kids walking, I mean, plenty of adults have had incidents in their process of
Mhm.
taking care of the cemetery where a caretaker has been, working around a grave or whatever, and the stone has fallen over on them. I couldn't even imagine what would happen if one of these stones that weighs a ton,
Yeah,
quite literally, fell over on a 3 or 4 year old who was
yeah.
climbing on it or whatever. Um, Now, with that said, because and there was I think last year there was a video circulating on Instagram where a mom had taken her little one to the cemetery and he did touch the stones. He wasn't really leaning on the stones and he was not climbing on them. She was, but he was like tracing the lettering with his finger and stuff.
Yeah.
That's okay
Yeah.
in most cases. Now there are some cemeteries that will ask you not to touch the stones, but um he wasn't going to do any major damage to that. He was very curious about the artwork and the lettering and and I did actually I don't very often comment on the videos, but I did make a comment because so many people were giving this mom a hard time about don't let your child walk on the grave, don't let your child touch the
Oh my
headstone,
goodness.
don't let your
Yes.
child. And I was like, okay guys, you're getting a little too harsh with the respect. We want them to
Yes.
be respectful, but nothing this mom and little boy were doing was disrespectful. And in fact, she was encouraging his
Hmm.
curiosity and encouraging him to not fear the cemetery, but to
Right.
understand that this is where people are buried. And in a healthy way, I think introducing him to the idea and the concept of death. It's hard for little ones to accept that concept. Um, and by taking him there and letting him see it and letting him see the stones and maybe touch where things are carved a little bit,
Right.
he was fine.
I
So,
agree. I agree. Sometimes people get a little bit too overzealous, but I think, can you imagine the impression? Because the mom was there. She was probably showing him to be gentle and
mm-hmm,
respectful. And then that
mm-hmm.
might just start a curiosity about cemeteries or art, or goodness knows where that could have went from there.
Right. I mean, we've had guests on our show, Ryan specifically, I think it was Ryan, who told us the story about teaching his son how to read
Yeah.
or his letters, teaching his letters at least via the
Yeah.
headstones.
Exactly.
So, there's a lot of good things about it. And I'm not saying don't ever take your children into a cemetery, just teach them how to be respectful when they're
Teach them how
there.
to be respectful when you're there.
Yeah, it's not a playground, although some cemeteries do have them. So if they have them, take advantage of it. Use the
Yeah.
playground. But if you're in an older cemetery, just don't let them climb on things. Don't let them remove things off the headstones.
Right.
And that's a general rule for anybody. Don't remove
Anything.
unless it's your family's headstone and you have
Right.
to clean it up. Leave the decorations there, leave whatever, so many people leave coins, rocks, other little trinkets, just
Right.
leave them. Don't move them. Don't now. I have many times reset things that I've
Oh,
noticed
that's different.
are
Yeah.
out of place. Like that's different. Yeah. Or a flag that may have fallen out or whatever. I'll put it back in or flowers or whatever, but I don't take them away from the summit. Now, that's a lie. That's a bold faced lie because so as a Bloom Bridge runner, I will take old Bloom Bridge bouquets off of a stone that I've delivered to previously to replace it with the new one. And I do throw the old ones out because,
Well,
after
they're
a few
so
months, silk flowers do, I mean, they're still pretty good, but like the sun fades them and the
yeah,
weather's gotten to
that's
them.
different. Yeah,
I do remove those, but I also have permission technically. I'm
that's
caring
what you're
for that
supposed to
stone on
do.
behalf of the family who is
Right.
sending the flowers. But yeah,
And that's a good point too, with especially to be familiar with your cemetery's decoration guides.
yes.
Because some cemeteries have very, very strict guides as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. And sometimes if you've been doing certain things for decades, that does not necessarily mean that that was allowed. It's just people weren't consistently keeping up with people. And then,
Or rules
then
changed
it
over
may
the years too.
or it's changed or um, some of the rules have been in place, they just have never been upheld. And the reason, the reason is for many of the bigger cemeteries, there's when the mowers come in, there's issues with if you have metal, if you have plastic, anything in the ground that can become projectiles.
Glass.
And sometimes, unfortunately, people like to go over the top of the decorations. And so then they have to be consistent for everyone. So before you go buy anything expensive to put out, I would definitely check with the cemetery and most cemeteries will have a decoration guide. So
Yeah.
familiarize yourself with this. You don't lose anything and you're not upset if something does get removed.
Right. And also get to know when removal days happen because some
Right.
cemeteries, especially like national cemeteries,
Mhm.
Fort Logan, I know at least twice a month, I think, and they usually have it posted, but they will have a day if you haven't removed flowers or other things other than coins. They leave the coins and the stones alone.
Right. That's a
But
military thing. Yeah.
flowers or other types of things they will remove every so often. And part of that is because it's military and they want everything to look pretty
Right.
uniform. Um, but also it's for their upkeep because, like you said, that stuff gets in the way of the mowers and the weed
Mhm.
whackers and all the things that they use to maintain the grounds themselves. So if you want to put even just flowers on a grave, check because you might put them on the day before and then they're gone the next day. So check
Right,
those dates.
exactly. And that has happened.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, you took something out there, but it's already gone because you took it the day before or the day of their cleanup day. So check that.
And I
Um,
think what has changed is like, especially in the Victorian era, because that's Jenny in our time frame, my time
our
frame,
favorite ones.
our
Yeah.
I had more than one person here. Um, there were so many strict rules. People knew the rules, people followed the rules. And luckily, we don't live in a time where it's constant funerals and we have all these rules. So I think people have um, forgotten or they don't know cemetery etiquette. One thing that I've noticed a lot of is if a funeral is taken place and someone comes out to visit, wait until the funeral's over. You
Yeah.
can't,
If you're in that
yeah,
area,
especially if you're in the same block as a funeral is taking place. Wait
don't
until it's
drive through
over.
it.
Don't drive through it. I mean, many cemeteries have more than one road to your
Mm-hmm.
block. So, just be mindful. You don't need to be nosy and drive by and see what's going on. Go up and around the block and just, again, put yourself in the family's place. How would you feel if you were that person and somebody was driving by like you're gawking, like you're almost on display. So just be mindful of that.
And don't, if you're photographing graves and there's a funeral, don't photograph the funeral.
No.
Do not photograph the service. Let that is for the family and the friends. It does not need to be photographed. It does not need to be posted on social media anywhere. If they want to do that, that's fine.
Mhm.
But the rest of us don't get that privilege. That's
No.
not for us to do. So please don't do that. And if you are nearby, if you happen to be visiting or whatever, speak softly. Don't be yelling and giggling and have a good time. But like, if you're close enough to where they might be able to hear you, just think of it as like a library.
Yes,
For
because be mindful of who's around you. Yes.
yes, because I have actually been in cemeteries when there's a service happening and there are people just hamming it up nearby. And I don't know if they're not aware of the service or they don't think the service can hear
Right.
them,
Probably
but
can't hear them.
and I get it. When you're outside, sound carries differently and all of that. But again, if that were your family member, do you really want the party happening right next door while you're
Mhm.
mourning their death? So be respectful of those. And yeah, don't photograph them and don't put them on
No.
social media ever. Um, unless you are part of that party and you have permission to do that. Um, and then another important rule, don't leave trash in the cemetery.
Yes.
Please
So if you're cleaning up stuff and there's not a handy receptacle for trash, just take it with you
put
and
it
throw
in
it
your
out when
car.
you go.
Yep. And if you're picnicking, if for the cemeteries that allow the picnicking at somebody's gravesite, you're visiting grandma and you decide to have a
Yeah.
picnic with her,
Yeah.
great. Make sure everything goes. Don't leave anything
Right.
there. Don't leave trash there. Um, and don't expect the grounds maintenance to clean up after you either.
Right.
Like
That's really
that's
not their
not what
job.
they're hired to do.
Exactly.
They're
And
hired.
yeah. And another rule I think, or it's a consideration, especially for the more of the funeral home and the cemetery staff, is when you're attending a service, be number one, mindful of the time. And
Mm-hmm.
if the service is that it is if the graveside, the service before a graveside is at two different locations, um, it's best not to come out ahead of the hearse
Right.
and go out to the site
Mm-hmm.
and being sometimes people, I swear to God, is like in everything, they want to go early so they can get a front row seat. And then it causes traffic, um, not so much hazards, but it makes it really inconvenient for the cemetery staff who are leading out the services as well as the hearse. Because
Yes.
the hearse is it's a fairly large vehicle. And sometimes cemetery roads are tight. And if cars are parked along the line, there's been times where people who decided they had to get out there early, they had to move their cars because there was no way for the hearse to get in. So we like to be able to have not as so much as sacred, but a nice way in without cars in the way and people have to do certain things. We want it to be very sacred and respectful for the family.
Yes.
So that always helps.
Definitely. Yeah. Don't. There should be no rush. It's. I mean, a funeral service. There's no rush. Just let it happen. And unless you're immediate family, you don't need to be in the front. One of the other rules following that whole driving thing is one, if you are there and there's not necessarily a service, but you're driving through the cemetery, drive slowly. Most cemeteries have a posted speed limit of like 5 or 10 miles per hour. You do not need to fly through the cemetery, even if it cuts through to go to whatever road on the other side, whatever. Please don't speed. I have been here in Denver at Fairmount Cemetery, which is a large cemetery and it has some wider paved roads. And there have been times when I have been there and people come flying through, like down, I'm trying Millionaire Row, which is where all the
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
mausoleums and stuff are. And there have been times where I've been there and people are just flying through down that road. And for one thing, it's a cemetery, so you should be driving slowly and respectfully, even if you're not there to visit. But two, the amount of people and wildlife that are moving around in those cemeteries,
Yes.
and also and I think about the grounds workers all the time because they're using heavy equipment that's noisy. They may not hear your car coming if they're with the mower or some other motorized equipment that they have to use in the cemetery. And if you're just flying through it, also, please don't use the cemetery as a place to teach someone who doesn't drive yet how to drive in the cemetery because multiple stories have come out in the last few years, especially of people learning how to drive in cemeteries. But you get a brand new driver who's still learning how to be familiar with the car and they end up going off the road, running over things, backing into things. So the cemetery is not a place to teach new drivers how to drive. That is the parking lot, the empty
Yeah.
parking lot of the high school on the weekend, or, whatever abandoned shopping center where there's no traffic yet. Those are the places to do that. The cemetery is not your driver's ed course. So please don't use it for that.
And also now with spring coming out, people I think are excited to get back out and doing stuff in the cemetery. Or if you've never done any work in the cemetery, people are like, well, maybe I want to do that. Let's watch a few YouTube videos so I can learn how to fix headstones and how to
Or
clean
clean
headstones
them.
or clean them. Jenny and I have had nightmares over certain people that are on YouTube showing how to clean. Take the time to learn the proper techniques. We highly recommend, I don't know if AGS has a YouTube channel, but Atlas Preservation, um, Jacora, which was with the National Park Service, that's Jason Church. Those would be, I think, the two most trusted sites as with for proper cleaning techniques.
Did you mention Epic?
Oh, and epic preservation.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's another good one.
And then because so it's epic preservation, Atlas, uh, yeah, epic preservation,
Atlas.
Atlas preservation, and Chikora, which is like as Jason Church. If you look up Jason Church, you'll find it. Because there are so many very convincing experts in the field who would tell you that you don't pay attention to them, use this product instead. And but we highly stand by and recommend those three, especially. We've seen their work. We've taken classes by them. They've been in the business for decades. So
Yeah. And
just take your time. Yeah.
another good resource in addition to those three is also the National Park Service.
Yes.
Which they all of them also will allude to the National Park Service because they're using the best practices that we know of for right now when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to cleaning and repairing and restoring stone. So again, and also the other important thing, I don't think you mentioned this, but if you're going to go in and do that, make sure you have permission to do it. Even cleaning a
Yes.
stone. Some cemeteries have very strict rules that unless you are a descendant of the person buried there, you cannot touch those stones for repair, for cleaning, for anything. And so, even if you think you're doing a really good deed, which I'm not saying you're not,
Right.
if you are not a descendant of that person, even though that stone is in really bad shape, if the cemetery says you can't do it, then
Yeah.
you can't do it. So, make sure you have permission before you just go. Now, there are the abandoned cemeteries or the cemeteries that you obviously can tell nobody is caring for. And that's a little bit different story. But if you're going to a cemetery where they have grounds crews, they have an office, they still hold regular services, all of that, make sure you get proper permission before you just start, even with your D2 or even just with water or whatever.
Right.
Don't do it unless it's okay by the cemetery or by a family member.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, I mean, I know people who have reached out to families and been like, hey, I live nearby and I'd like to clean up your ancestors' gravesite. And people are like, yeah, that would be great. But just ask. Don't just assume that it's going to be okay.
There was something you said, and it went right out of my head. Oh, even like you mentioned, what you think are little abandoned cemeteries, more chances on or not, those could also be on private property.
Yes.
So that's a thing too to take into consideration. As much as we see some of these sites, I was like, and want to go in and clean them up, is we're
Find
not
out who to
entitled to
ask.
do that. Yeah, we're not entitled to do that.
Right. Yeah. Find out who to ask. There's actually one that's not very far from my house at all. It's an old farm family cemetery and it's not very big and it's situated between a Chick-fil-A and a shopping center and people will notice it because and for a long it's so funny because we've gone to that Chick-fil-A and stuff for years and there was a long time before I realized it was there and I think I noticed it one day. I was sitting in the drive-thru and I was like, oh, there's a cemetery. So then I went to research it. There's one stone in there and that's a more recent stone that was added within the last 20 years because none of the original stones exist, or at least
Hmm.
not on the surface anymore. I don't know if
Right.
maybe they've sunk or whatever. That cemetery is locked though. It's padlocked. You can't get into it. The gate's pretty high. Um, And the last I knew is the University of Colorado had at least guardianship of it. I don't know that they have
Oh,
ownership of
wow.
it, but they had guardianship of it. That's why there's a stone there now, because they had something to do with putting it there to commemorate the family that owned the original property.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, but I would love to be able to go in there and like probe for actual stones under the ground and stuff, but I can't just walk in there. I would
Right.
need to find out who is the guardian of that cemetery and be like, can I go in there and clean it up and all it because this time of year the grass and stuff starts to grow and it doesn't get mowed and it doesn't get cared for, but I can't just walk in there and be like, I'm just going to fix the cemetery now. So
Right.
and I am definitely not a descendant of the original farmers that owned that property at one point, so that buried their people there. But yeah, permission is key.
Mhm. And
So
if there's a cemetery in your neighborhood or in your town that you would like to get involved with, and maybe you don't have the time to do the volunteer work, support is one of the greatest things a cemetery, especially a cemetery nonprofit, can use because not only does
mm-hmm.
support could possibly help financially, but it also creates community involvement, which then shows the importance to the community and the powers that be that this is a place that matters. Because if people aren't interested, then it's not a priority. So
Right.
get involved, no matter how small no matter how what you think is a very small, what is the word? I can't think of the word. Activity that you're doing or what you're doing is won't amount to anything. Every little bit counts
Even
tremendously.
if it's
So
just documenting
yes,
stuff, putting a record of it somewhere so that it's documented somewhere. That way, maybe in the future, if you have a group that wants to do more of the physical labor, at
right.
least they have something to start with because
Yeah.
that's really important.
Do
Uh,
research, share stories, attend events, help with events. I mean, there's so much a person can do to help their local cemetery.
yes. And if you have one of those quote unquote abandoned cemeteries that you're interested in fixing up and don't know where to start, besides getting permission, that's the first thing. But if you need help with that, I'll put in our link some of our guests who have that experience, who have done that before. I'm thinking specifically of Rachel at Epic
Yeah.
Preservation, but we've had some other guests too, that are more than happy to answer your questions and help lead you in the right direction for starting that kind of work. Because it's daunting to be the only person at first who will go in
Yeah.
and be like, okay, this cemetery needs help. What do I do? And if you've
Yeah.
never done it before, which and I think this is why I like to think of Rachel when they started their first cemetery, it was not something that had been done before. They were brand new to the whole idea of fixing up this cemetery that they did.
Right.
Um, and now, however many years later, they do it
It's,
all the
it's
time.
been a while.
But
It's been a while. Yeah.
I guarantee you they're more than happy to answer your questions and help lead you in the right direction and help tell you maybe how to get started with contacting the proper authorities to do everything, and then making that cemetery a lovely little place to visit again, and then follow all these etiquette rules that we've just listed.
Right. Exactly.
So, well, we that's today's episode is very short, mostly because I have
Even
been
though we've
crazy
already
busy.
been talking over an hour, it's very short.
Yeah, it's shorter than our usual episodes, but it was important to us to bring up the etiquette because Dianne has had some issues now that spring is coming up at
Yep.
Evergreen, and there's some things that have popped
People
up
are
and
alive. Yes.
that they've had to remind visitors of. Also, we wrapped up Of Mice and Men on Sunday, which if you listen to last week's episode, we had a lovely discussion about that. And then I had posted stuff on our social media about it. So that show ended Sunday. It was fabulous. We sold out the whole weekend, and
Um,
the library is willing to let us come back and do another show next year. So I'm super excited about that because we've been wanting to do this particular type of theater for a long time. And it's almost like a reader's theater at this point since we're doing this as a partnership with the library. So
that's cool.
yeah, it gives the audience loved it because they were sitting right there with our actors as they were portraying it. So we had several people, especially if they sat in the front row, who had said they knew the story or they'd seen it done other places, but to be sitting right there in the bunkhouse, so to speak, just gave them a total different perspective on the show. So
That's
that was
cool.
fun. But because I was doing that all weekend, I had zero research time. So there was no researching like a fun, cool story to share with everybody this week. And then sadly, I had to attend a funeral today. So I just was like, I don't have the energy
Oh, and you shouldn't have the energy.
to worry about it. But we will have a regular episode for you guys next week. But I wanted to have something. And then Diane's like, well, let's talk about etiquette. And I was like, you know what? That's perfect. We can totally do that. So we will be back next week with a regular show and some fascinating episodes. And we are working on scheduling some new guests. So that will be fun. So the summer is going to be great.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, if you've even had a inkling, you can
There you
edit that
go.
out. If you've ever had an inkling of maybe you would like to start volunteering in a local cemetery and you just don't know where to start, reach out to us.
Absolutely.
We are more than happy to steer you in the right direction of where to find things and just advice, because I've been doing this for 25 years, not the podcast, but the cemetery stuff. And Jennie she does so much in everything that she does with the various cemeteries that she gets involved in. So yeah, we're here to help people foster a love of cemeteries and not to be afraid to take that first step of getting involved to make a
Yes.
difference.
And so you can email us, you can reach out over Instagram or Facebook. And so, sometimes it can take us a while to get back to everybody because for when we first started this podcast, I could get right back to everybody immediately. Now we get a lot of emails and a lot of even Facebook messages. Sometimes it takes us a few days to get to everybody because we're like, you have to sort through it. But I promise we will respond if you reach out to us. So please reach out to us. And again, if you check our show notes, and I'll leave some stuff in our show notes for this week about the various sources that if you're looking to do that you can also find. That way you don't have to necessarily try and go through the long Google lists of everybody, but we'll put it in the show notes for you. And so happy spring. It's officially here.
Happy spring.
Enjoy getting out
flowers
to
are blooming.
I know. Tulips are coming up.
Yep.
Yeah. It's raining, not snowing. So I'm
Yes.
in Colorado, it could snow in spring, but lately we've had more rain than snow, which I'm very happy with. So we'll
Yeah, because I think
rain.
you had rain when we had 6 inches of snow a couple weeks ago. So
yeah. You guys always get hit harder than we do though down there. But you're right at the foot of Pikes Peak, which I'm not. I'm a little further away.
So that's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
It is. So everybody have a good one, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.